How's your day been? Okay.
Oh yeah, not bad. I'm a bit fed up with it being like October
Ah,
instead of July.
I know.
It's kind of very wet round here. I don't know where you're based, but
So,
yeah, it's kind of soggy.
so we're in Berkshire. I mean, I'm in Reading, Berkshire, but yeah, it's the same. The last few days, weekend, it's just been a bit terrible. So, yeah,
I know Reading. I used to get done by the traffic system. It's so hard to navigate Reading without getting a ticket.
yeah, I've done that a few. I've gone down a bus lane probably last year, which I didn't know was a bus lane, and I've got a ticket. So yeah, it's a nightmare around there.
Awful.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. I just wanted to
No,
ask.
not at all.
Just wanted to ask a few questions about your career, basically. So, just to start off with,
Yeah, sure.
could you tell me a little bit more about where you was born, where you grew up, what this was like growing up?
Yeah, well, I always struggle with that question because my parents split when I was very small,
Okay.
and and my mum moved around quite a lot. My dad moved around a lot. And I went to boarding school,
Okay.
so I never really felt rooted in one place. I mean, possibly Hertfordshire. My mum lived in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire for a while, and I was there. And I went to school in the middle of nowhere in Essex.
Okay.
And my dad lived here and abroad. And so, I kind of didn't feel, I mean, I suppose I was a southerner,
Mhm.
but it's that broad. I wouldn't say one place.
Okay. Okay. So your career involves writing, producer, directing. What made you choose going into these roles, and what was the first part of these roles that you got started in your career?
Well, I decided I wanted to work in TV really quite young. My dad used to sometimes do work for London Weekend Television, an ITV company.
Okay.
And in those days, there was no safeguarding. So if you took your child to work, you just I got dumped in a studio, which was quite a nice place to be left because there was a lot going on, things to watch, while he had meetings. And I think it was partly that, the excitement of being in a studio, the adrenaline, the smell of the paint and the electricity and all of that, and actors wandering around in costumes.
Mhm.
And then when I was at school, I got more and more interested in how TV is made. And in those days, I mean, we only had sort of three channels, but obviously there was a huge amount of stuff being made in these big studios, and it just felt like a really exciting industry to be part of.
Yeah.
So I set my sights on it really from probably about the age of 13.
Okay.
And as soon as I left university, I hadn't really wanted to go to university, but I kind of did it because of family pressure. And then later was glad that I went. But really, most of my time at Durham was spent producing and directing plays and trying to get kind of relevant experience.
Yeah.
And then I very soon after I left Durham, I got a job at the BBC at the very junior, like in those days, the starting point was really to be what they would now call a runner, a
Yeah.
floor assistant.
Okay.
And you belonged to a department and you would be allocated to all kinds of different programs. So your week might be Top of the Pops, Blue Peter,
Yeah.
you might do a drama, you might do another children's program. And that way you really learned from the ground up what all the different jobs involved, how studios worked. It was a really thorough training, really an excellent way to sort of work out where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
And really, I wanted to direct more than anything else. Directing was the fun job. And looking back, it really still is. I mean, you kind of end up in any career, you get promoted away from the thing perhaps that you love the most. You become more of a manager and more, the things that you don't love the most, dealing with kind of budgets and people and staffing. Whereas my happiest memories really are of being a director, and particularly directing, the BBC in those days. The children's department trained you so that you would do multi-camera, which is sort of 5 or 6 cameras in a studio,
Yeah.
sometimes live, which is very exciting,
Okay.
very terrifying, um, or filming on location, going and doing things single camera. And looking back, I mean, I was incredibly spoiled. I was able to film all over the world and do incredible bits of filming with really interesting people and places,
Yeah.
and then come back and do some studios. So it was kind of like that was a really lovely time. And then, of course, I ended up becoming more and more senior. And once you do that, you cease to be able to do the fun stuff. But there you go.
What I think you kind of covered it a little bit. What kind of work was involved to get your name out and get recognised? Was that just for the play work or?
Well, I mean, if you mean before the BBC, it's very hard to. It's incredibly hard industry to break into now. But then I have a theory that I don't think is that advanced, but makes sense. That really any job worth doing,
Yeah.
you will be up against strong competition. Whether you want to be a lawyer, whether you want to be a doctor, whatever it is. And I wanted to become a director in TV, and there weren't that many opportunities to do that. So you really had to fight to be noticed and to get. I mean, just to get into the BBC took me about, I think, 3 or 4 goes. And there used to be people would say to you, if you go for this job, you might have to go for it 3 times before you'll get offered it, if you get offered it.
Okay.
So you had to be very resilient, and you had to be, kind of have a kind of thick skin. I mean, there were certainly people who said to me, "Oh, I'm colourblind, for instance," and I remember one senior producer saying to me, "Well, you can never be a director if you're colourblind." I mean, it was nonsense and really quite wrong of him to say that. But,
Yeah.
obviously at that age and that time, I took him seriously. And, you were always sort of, looking around you and thinking, well, who's going for this job as well as me? And, therefore you were up against talent. You weren't up against people who, I mean, occasionally there was sort of the odd person who would get through the system and you'd think, how on earth did they ever get the job? Maybe not ask too many questions about it. But the main thing is you had to show real enthusiasm and then back that up in an interview. And BBC interviews are famously terrifying because they were called boards,
Okay.
and BOARD, and you'd be sitting opposite maybe 4 people, maybe 1 good cop, but 3 bad cops who would all be throwing questions at you. I mean, I remember even for the floor assistant job, the most junior job, I remember you were expected to, a bit like the London cab drivers, you were expected to have a version of the knowledge, so to know the shortest routes all around Television Centre and the TV Theatre and Centre House and all the other BBC London buildings. And so they would say things like, you have a guest in main reception who is a wheelchair user. What is the quickest way to get that guest from reception to the BBC club? And you'd have to know the right way. And also you couldn't take them in a goods lift because obviously they were a guest. So things like that. So you had to know your stuff, but also have a little bit of initiative. I mean, my favourite story is that someone else in studio management was going for a job. I think it was a job as a floor manager.
Okay.
And they were asked, you've got an elephant in your studio, and the elephant is too heavy for the studio floor and crashes through the floor into the studio below, which is a reference to Lime Grove.
Okay.
And so how could you have avoided that? Now, the correct answer is that floor managers were supposed to know about a very boring thing called point loading and what's the heaviest thing you can have on a studio floor before you have problems. But this person answered, well, if the elephant's fallen through the floor into another studio, it's not my problem anymore. It's the problem of the people in the studio below. So there you go. I don't think they got the job on that occasion.
Oh. Okay. You have worked on Blue Peter for quite some time of your career. Could you tell me a little bit more how you got this role and what was involved?
Yeah, well, I wanted to work on Blue Peter from really early on. I was in the 6th form, I think, revising supposedly for my A-levels.
Okay.
And usually that meant quite a lot of skiving off and watching afternoon TV.
Okay.
And so I was 16 or 17 and I was watching an edition of Blue Peter. And it happened to have a behind the scenes about the new presenter, Janet Ellis's first day on the show. And I just watched this behind the scenes and thought, what an amazing job it would be to work on that show. And it also featured Biddy, who was the editor at the time.
Okay.
And I thought, yeah, that's the job I'd like. And weirdly, almost exactly 20 years later, I got that job. So I don't know that it was from that point all the way through, but certainly once I was within the BBC and within the children's department, I kind of really did want to do Blue Peter.
Okay.
And I wanted to prove to myself that I could do the job as well as anybody else. But also, I mean, you couldn't make up a better mix of things that show offered. It offered incredible travel, live TV, a big budget,
Yep.
a great reputation. I mean, literally, if you phoned up almost anywhere in the UK and said we're from Blue Peter, the answer would be yes. And other shows, if you wanted to film somewhere, people would be like, I can't be bothered, or no, don't really want you. Blue Peter was invariably, yes, we definitely want Blue Peter there.
Yeah.
So there was kudos to it as well. And within the studios, if you had the imagination and the ambition, you could do incredible things, and we did. I mean, there was some amazing studio stuff that you look back and think no one does anything like that in the studio now.
Yeah.
The skill has almost died, and that's really sad because most studio shows now are like chat shows, they're just talking heads, whereas we were doing everything from dramas to big music numbers. We had all the kind of leading West End shows in, and
Yeah.
making that stuff, the quality of it was incredible. And at the time, we didn't exactly take it for granted, but we expected that that was what we were there to deliver. And I think nowadays, sadly, the bar has gone
Yeah.
partly due to lack of money,
Hmm.
but also because I think it's very, very hard now to spend serious money on children's programs because the BBC are in such dire straits financially overall, and children's is always the bottom of the pile, sadly.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of children these days as well go watch most of their stuff on YouTube as well. So
Well, that's right. I mean, that's right. I mean, YouTube, TikTok. I mean, there's fierce competition for children's attention spans.
yeah,
But on the other hand, children do like great content.
yeah,
If they know where to find it, they will like it. But the trouble is, it's like, how do you, in such a crowded marketplace, how do you reach them? How do you, and I think the jury is out on, there are no easy answers to that question.
yeah,
And the BBC also, of course, has lots of limits on that it can't compete as aggressively because it has to be public service. It can't be as rampantly commercial.
yeah, yeah. Okay. You've done roles for the likes of Disney, Top of the Pops, Going Live, etc. Could you tell me a little bit more about this work?
Well, I mean, it was all part of once I'd had a kind of training period. I had about a year and a half of working in children's as a trainee director. And I
Hmm.
was on what they called attachment. So at the end of that, the BBC, there isn't necessarily a job for you. And they said to me, oh, you'll have to go back to being an assistant floor manager. And having had over a year of directing, I thought, I'm not going to go back and be the guy in charge of the props and running the rehearsal room. And then they said, you're going to do a show with Dale Winton, who I later directed and was a lovely, lovely man.
Okay.
But it was a show called Pets Win Prizes. And I remember saying to my studio management boss, what is this Pets Win Prizes program? And I thought it was beyond parody. I thought the BBC can't seriously be doing a program in which pets win prizes as the title. So anyway, it was serious. And I just said, I'm not doing that. I'd rather resign and take my chances as a freelancer.
Okay.
And of course, I think that's probably what they wanted me to do. They didn't really want staff people. So the first job I got was at Disney, directing and producing on Disney Adventures and Disney Club.
Okay.
And that was a great job. I mean, Disney is a sort of scary corporate organisation. And they used to say to me, my executive used to say, you're so goddamn the BBC. And I sort of was really. I didn't approve of all they have very clever ways of brainwashing the audience and getting kids to be kind of dedicated Disney customers for life. And it's very clever and very interesting, but it kind of slightly stuck in my throat too. And they were very ruthless. I mean, that people would be got rid of, or I was ordered to get rid of a presenter on one occasion. And I didn't really like that way of operating. That ruthlessness was not great. And I'd been on a 3-year contract, and after a year, I got an offer to go. Well, I kind of fell out with Disney. I fell out with the exec, and I think we both agreed, really, he didn't really want me around, and I'd had enough of it. It was very well paid. I mean, I went from a BBC salary, it was 3-4 times what I was getting at the BBC.
Okay. Wow.
So that was helpful career-wise, because then when I started to go back to the BBC, I could say, well, they wouldn't match it, but they would then raise their rate, and it all became a kind of negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and I did, all these different shows, and it was a heyday of big studio shows, so that was great.
Yeah.
And I did a year on Record Breakers, which was brilliant because again, it was like filming in the States and doing, great filming, but also doing big studios. And then I did Tomorrow's World, which was another show I'd really grown up with and really liked that show.
Yeah.
And I'd worked on it as the floor assistant. So to direct it, and the lineup, the presenters then were Peter Snow and Philippa Forrester. And Philippa had been one of our presenters at Disney, and she and I really hit it off. thought she was so intelligent and sparky, and I mean, I still do, and I think she's one of the classic case of women's careers in television don't tend to last as long, which hopefully will change. But she should absolutely be on TV now. She's brilliant.
Okay.
So working with her and Peter Snow was amazing. Very eccentric man, very sort of posh and commanding, but a real charmer. And I remember my car broke down. We used to clean the studios at Teddington, because they were cheaper than Television Centre, bizarrely. Okay. This was in the days of producer choice. Anyway, my car broke down, and Peter Snow said, "Oh, I'll get that sorted for you, dear boy." And he kind of rolled up his sleeves of his posh suit, and he got covered in oil and all the rest of it, while I stood there like a 1920s flapper, unable to do anything technical. And he got the car going again. So I have very fond memories of that. So yeah, they were good times.
Cool. You've also been a writer for Doctor Who magazine over your career. How did you get this role, and what was involved in this?
Well, that was blagging it. I mean, I got interested in Doctor Who when I was away at boarding school. Now, you have to remember that when I was away at school in the late 70s, early 80s, there was no internet. There were no mobile phones. You were so cut off from the outside world. But there was a boy in my house who used to get the Doctor Who magazine. And I saw this and I said, well, let me have a look at that. And I was really interested in the fact that this program that I'd really liked when I was a child, but had grown out of, was still running. And it sort of the magazine had a kind of bit of behind the scenes stuff. And I was really interested in the behind the scenes of TV. Okay. And there wasn't very much available then. You couldn't really, certainly weren't all the books and things that there are now. So I liked that. I really was interested in that. So I started to look at it. And then I thought, with the arrogance of youth, I thought, well, I could write for this. And I then left my boarding school for the sixth form. I went to a grammar school. I decided I basically, as an ultimatum, I said to my parents, I don't want to be a boarding school anymore. So I took my chances and went to a local grammar school not far from me. Okay. And then there were these amazing things called girls in the sixth form. So I started to make friends with the opposite sex, and one of them, her sister, I think, was going out with Louise Jameson's brother. It's that random. And she said, "Oh, you're a Doctor Who fan. Would you like to interview Louise Jameson?" And I thought, yeah, why? Of course I would. And so I went round to her house and I think I've still got the tape somewhere, but rambled on and asked her these questions. And then I thought, what am I going to do with it? And then I thought, well, I could try and sell it to Doctor Who magazine. So I couldn't type in those days. So I got my mum to type it up. I wrote it out longhand. Okay. And then she typed it up, and I wrote a ridiculously pompous, what I thought was grown up covering letter, and sent it to Alan Mackenzie, who was the editor of Doctor Who magazine. Okay. And he bought it. Wow. And then after that, and he just said, "Have you got any more?" So then I used to sort of go to the local theatre, and in those days there were lots of touring productions, and quite often they had Doctor Who actors in them. Okay. And I would just leave a note at the stage door and say, I'm interested in interviewing. Of course, I used to pretend I was from Doctor Who magazine. And then BBC Doctor Who magazine. And it worked like a charm. And then I'd get to interview people. So that happened initially. And then Alan said, "Oh, you're doing more work for us. I'd like you to do more. Come and have lunch." I was 17, so I got on the train into London, went to meet this man, and he looked at me in horror. He said, "You're a child." He said, "I had no idea you were so young." And it's hard to imagine now, but I was. And he... And I sort of thought, oh, he's going to tell me he can't, use me anymore. And he said, "I don't really care." He said, "You're doing the job, good for you." And he was great. And I did Doctor Who magazine for 4 years. And for some of that time, I was writing something like 60,000 words a month. Wow. So it was a great way of learning professional discipline. I mean, especially once the program was postponed, because, we didn't have research facilities. So, I was writing a lot of waffle. But I had to nonetheless come up with themes and ideas and, write 3,000 words on alien planets or whatever it was, and deal with John Nathan Turner at the BBC, who was the producer, which was a good, way of learning a bit about how TV worked and going to see studios and some filming and things. Yeah. So it was a really great opportunity. I made some terrible mistakes along the way, but you learn from your mistakes. And then by the time that came to an end, there was a new editor coming in. He and I, again, we didn't really see eye to eye. So it was the right time to stop doing it. And by then I joined the BBC and was a bit queasy about the BBC did not like Doctor Who in those days. The reputation of Doctor Who and Doctor Who fans within the BBC was pretty low.
Yeah.
So you didn't really want to identify yourself as part of that tribe. So
Okay.
I was happy to move on from Doctor Who magazine, and I think it was the right time.
Yeah, yeah. You've already covered this, but are you a Doctor Who fan, and did you watch the show in the past?
Well, I grew up with it. As I say, I started watching. My earliest memories are sort of John Pertwee, Terror of the Autons, the Demons, that kind of era,
Yeah.
which dates you. It's like Blue Peter presents. It dates you like DNA, who you watched. And then I carried on watching through Tom Baker, because I liked Liz Sladen. I liked Liz Sladen more than I liked Tom Baker.
Okay.
And then when she'd gone, and then I liked Leela, I liked Louise Jameson, but then I kind of, about 78, end of 77, 78, I really lost interest in it. I thought it's really cheap and really tacky, and occasionally I would see it be on a home and we'd all laugh at how, it's got so bad.
Yeah.
Of course, now I realise it was pretty even in tone all the way through. You're just going through, becoming a teenager.
Yeah,
Interested.
Yeah.
So then I got back into it around the time Peter Davison was cast, and I thought his casting was genius. It felt really modern to me. There were people being kind of scathing about how it was bland or it was this, but he was a big name at the time, and he'd been big from All Creatures Great and Small. He was young, he had a lot of charm, and I liked what this guy John Nathan Turner was doing, because I felt like he was really trying to make the show feel modern and a bit more kind of, the way he would bring kind of famous actors into it, and which of course is standard now in the industry stuff, casting.
Yeah.
Everybody tries to do that, but he was ahead of the curve there. People were and are critical about the stories, and a lot of them were baloney, and some of the characterization was terrible. But in a way, that was always the case. You're missing the point, really, if you focus too much on that stuff with Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I loved, just like Blue Peter, I loved the kind of cyclical nature that, there'd always be a new companion coming in the same way there'd be a new presenter on Blue Peter, and they all then became part of this family, and it's a wonderful continuity, and it's sort of part of your life. It's a bit like a band, where you can hear a song and you can think, that takes me right back to the year I did my A-levels or whatever. They become part of a small part, but a part of the fabric of your life.
Yeah.
And so, Doctor Who, and then I really didn't, it began to lose its way, and I think certainly during some of the Colin Baker stuff, and then absolutely during the Sylvester McCoy time, I just thought this show's running on empty. I've slightly revised that opinion in retrospect, but that's how I felt at the time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really sorry to see it go, but I was thrilled when they decided to bring it back, because I thought the timing was so right, and it was so genius that it went.
Yeah.
If anyone else had brought it back, it would have almost certainly failed, I think.
Yeah.
But Russell T Davies and his genius for marrying all the honouring of the past, but bringing in the kind of, the new narrative principles, and the kind of getting girls to like the show.
Yeah.
His casting was, inspired, and his just energy and enthusiasm and love for it, that really can. Of course, I got to have a part in promoting the show, because Blue Peter, we did some really big competitions with them.
Yeah.
They'd done a design a monster competition in the 60s, but we did one where your monster was actually going to be in the show, which was a step up. And, it was a fantastic partnership and such a privilege to be part of.
Wow. That's amazing. Is there any part of your career that you're proud of the most, or had the most fun being part of?
Well, I'm sort of, it's very modern that. Everybody's always proud of everything. You watch reality shows and things like that, and everyone's going, proud of you, mate. Oh, I'm really proud of myself. Well, I never feel I can feel real satisfaction if I think a job has been done well, and certainly I can feel the privilege of if it's been fun and I've worked with great people. I am probably proudest of the documentary I did about the BBC, about Television Centre, which felt so wonderful to be given 90 minutes to make this documentary for BBC4 about Television Centre and the end of that era, because even though they've sort of got studios there, Television Centre is very far from being what Television Centre was. And to be asked to make the programme to encapsulate that and celebrate that was fantastic. It was wonderful professionally and personally, and it was a way of saying goodbye to a whole chunk of my life as a viewer and then as a TV professional, and that felt like and I feel like I got it right. I feel like we did. It wasn't just me, obviously, but I was responsible for bringing the people in who worked on it and for shaping it and for deciding the tone of it, the feel of it, and that really did feel like it all came together. So that was wonderful.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Could you tell me, what you have lined up for the future and look forward to working on?
Well, that's a good question. I've just written a book about Billy Baxter, so going back to Billy Peter, and
Okay.
that's taken about a year. And if I'm honest, at the moment, I'm still coming up for air because that takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
People think that the books are more straightforward, I think, than they actually know. I think I did over 110 interviews for it, as
Wow.
well as a huge amount of paper research and all the rest of it. So there may be another book project, but it won't start rapidly.
Yeah.
In terms of television, I finished a series for the BBC at the end of last year. I was then offered a series I didn't want to do
Okay.
at the beginning of this year. And I don't know, I'm in a very lucky place in that I don't need to do a TV show.
Mhm.
And I'm getting to an age now where, to put it brutally, what's the phrase? I'm male, pale, and hopefully not stale. But I'm obviously quite senior, and that means that your experience is a huge plus. But it also means that you don't really want to do certain shows that you might have done. I'm not being a snob,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't take on a job if I didn't think I could really put my heart and soul into it, do a
Yeah.
really good
Of
job.
course.
So some of the kind of low rent factual stuff that does the rounds are some of the reality shows which are, offered to me because my background is mainly factual.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's great to have a series about a caravan park, but I don't want to spend 6 months making a series about a caravan park. I just have any interest for me.
Yeah.
And the kind of things that I might want to do, unfortunately, lots of other people want to do them too. So, I'd love to do some of the heritage stuff, some of the really glossy, BBC4 traveling around
Okay.
the world. I've done quite a lot of that. I've been lucky to do a lot of that, so I know it's good. But there are a very small number of people who've got that all sort of sewn up. And unless I start doing a kind of kind hearts and coronets and bumping them all off, I doubt I'm going to get that particular cherry come my way. But yeah, so who knows?
Okay. Okay. Apart from writing and directing taking up a lot of your time, do you have any hobbies you enjoy doing at all?
Oh, my hobbies are nothing exciting. People would say, "Oh, he likes to go to the gym." I don't really like going to the gym. I feel like the only option you've got is to try to keep as healthy as possible.
Yeah.
So health is important. So I do like walking. I do like keeping healthy. And I'm lucky enough to live somewhere where there are amazing walks around and all the rest of it.
Okay.
I love reading. I love watching telly. Surprise, surprise.
Mhm.
And also the other thing that's very big for me is family and friends. Just spending time with people you care about. And the older you get, the more you realise the value of that, and the more that as unfortunately, sadly, you lose family and friends. And like one of my Doctor Who friends, a guy called Dominic May, he was only 61 when he died,
Okay.
and that really made me reflect on thinking, it was a great friendship. I really love the guy, but I don't want to make the mistake with other friendships of thinking, oh, 6 months has gone by and I've not seen them or talked to them or whatever. And I think in the modern world, it's very easy. We send texts, we are on WhatsApps or
Yeah.
whatever, and that's fine as a sort of placeholder. But really, the thing you want to do is actually spend time with people.
Yeah. Of course.
So yeah.
Of course. Of course. Just one final question then before we go. What advice would you give to anyone that wants to become a writer or director, or is maybe struggling to progress in that career path?
Well, they're two quite fairly different careers. But what I
Mhm.
would say about writing is the most important thing if you want to write is to write. So even if you're not writing for a commission or writing for something you've actually got lined up, you need to be serious about there's a huge amount of self-discipline required. Like, you have to write when you don't feel like writing. You have to write even if at the end of the day you've written garbage that you just get rid of because it's no good.
Yeah.
But if you continue to do that, it has its own reward because you begin to learn the discipline that you need to deliver whatever it is that you might end up being commissioned to write. And even if it's something you're writing for yourself, like a novel or a script, you have to apply the same standards. And the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to cut. So, when you've written something, even if you've loved a particular turn of phrase you've come up with or a section, I think editing and cutting is as important as the writing
Yep.
because of the impact of the final thing. And where there is a crossover with directing in both cases is perseverance. It's incredibly easy and understandable to lose heart and to get distracted and to think, oh, I'm never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those are the people who fall by the wayside. I mean, if I had a tenor for everybody I've met in my career who says, I want to write or I want to direct, and also even some people who've got the talent, you meet them. We used to employ a lot of trainee directors on Blue Peter, and there would be some people who come in and you think, well, they're going to be directing, if not movies, big primetime shows. And then, life intervenes, and what it takes to get through and to become that small, narrow band of people that really make it big is perseverance, talent,
Yeah.
hard work, and then when you get there, the other thing you've got to have is you've got to be very able to be agile and clever in your choices. So therefore, the final thing is luck. You absolutely need luck.
Okay.
And, it might just be one opportunity, or it might be, someone else's bad luck might become your good luck.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be aware of when an opportunity is there and to seize that opportunity.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot to take on board. But as I said at the beginning, there is no such thing as a great job that comes easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the advice. That's awesome advice. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been great listening and hearing about your career.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you for coming on, and I'll keep in touch by email.
Lovely. Thanks so much. Nice to see you, Craig.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.